The apocalypse. When an entire people are destroyed or destroy themselves. The end of civilization. For us today, as we go about our daily lives, it's barely something we consider. We're so sure it couldn't happen to us. But for some civilizations, it already has. In the 24th century BCE, Mesopotamia was made up of many different city-states, each with their own king and patron god. It was largely inhabited by two distinct ethnic groups, the Sumerians in the south and the Semitic Akkadian people in the north. In 2334 BCE, the Akkadians conquered the Sumerian lands, uniting the city-state kingdoms here to create an entirely new form of political organization. British archaeologist Sir Henry Rawlinson has been working on translating cuneiform.
Cuneiform isn't actually a language, it's a writing system. Cuneiform systems could be used to write all manner of ancient languages. There was an empire that we never knew had existed, that had been declared the greatest of all time.
Here, Rawlinson found references to the world's first empire, an empire that ruled over all of Mesopotamia. Rawlinson christens them the Akkadians.
The archaeologists were dumbfounded. Who were these people? How come we'd never heard of them? How could a whole civilization be destroyed in such a way that they would be entirely lost to the sands of time?
Archaeologists have a year for the collapse, a time of death for the Akkadian Empire, but they're still no closer to knowing why the Akkadians died out.
The problem with the Akkadians is that as they get bigger, they all seem to become victims of their own success. As the empire is expanding, there's constantly need for more food. There's constantly more mouths to feed.
With more and more pressure placed on Akkadian farming, how did they manage to feed an entire empire? Archaeologists turn to their records. Here they find evidence of Akkadian expansion into the Habor Plains in what is now northeastern Syria.
As you move into northern Mesopotamia, the landscape actually changes fairly radically from arid desert to plains. What we see is, unlike the south, where there was irrigation, we find that here farming is actually primarily rain-fed.
Rain-fed agriculture relies solely on rainfall to water crops. It isn't as efficient as irrigation farming, but on the Habor Plains, the Akkadians found a way to feed their empire. Grain production here became crucial for feeding their standing army. And Akkadian history is steeped in conflict. The north would be an ideal target for an enemy of theirs, and they had many. Archaeologists look to the north for any evidence of the Akkadian Empire's collapse. Renowned British archaeologist Max Mallowan excavates at the ruins of Tel Brak. It's a huge 7,000-year-old settlement on the dry farming Habor Plains. Surely, such a large site must hold Akkadian remains.
What he finds is walls, and not just walls to anything. He realises very soon that this is a palace with a grain store attached, and it's also a fortress.
But this isn't all Mallowan finds.
On the bricks is the stamp of the king Naram Sin. So this means that this was built at the height of the empire, but this palace, this great grain store, this fortress is unfinished. They've stopped building it halfway through.
In the decades since, more and more Akkadian sites are uncovered across the Habor Plains. Archaeologists are shocked by what they find. Site after site was abandoned by the Akkadians. Was this evidence they were under attack?
If you're going to conquer an ancient empire, you have to first take out their ability to feed themselves. In a vast empire, one of the things that you can do is start taking out their grain production cities.
Could this explain how the Akkadians disappeared from history? Were they wiped out? Archaeologists need to work out if there is any evidence of war. Marie-Agnès Corti is a geologist and a specialist in soil analysis. In 1990, she was brought in to examine sites across the Habor Plains.
Je voyais bien quelque chose de noir qui ressemble à du noir de fumée sur des surfaces que je pouvais suivre à la fouille.
Corti had found evidence of large-scale burning. Was Tel Brak destroyed by conflict? Luckily, the cuneiform records provide a lot of evidence for the Akkadians at war.
Not everybody wants to be a part of the Akkadian Empire. There are constant rebellions. There's constant unrest that has to be dealt with.
And in the east were the Gutians, nomadic mountain warriors continuously attacking the edges of the empire. But the Akkadians were very good at fighting.
The Akkadians were able to be so powerful because they had a standing army. The other thing that the Akkadians were able to do was to make incredible use of the bow and arrow. You didn't have to touch your opponent. And by the time you actually engage them hand-to-hand in combat, you've already won the war.
The Akkadians could hold their own, and closer analysis of the burned soil layer reveals something unusual.
Il n'y avait pas de traces de feu. Donc vous trouvez un dépôt noir qui a toutes les caractéristiques de dépôt de fumée, mais qui en théorie, ou en théorie dans les situations, je dirais, normales, est associé quelque part à des structures de combustion, et là, il n'y en avait pas. J'ai donc identifié dans ce niveau noir la présence de composés indiquant une vaporisation à très haute température, non seulement à très haute température, mais extrêmement rapide, que l'on appelle un phénomène de flash thermique. On ne sait les faire que expérimentalement en laboratoire. Donc là, il y a 4000 ans, de toute évidence, l'homme n'était pas capable de faire ça.
The burn layer couldn't have been caused by invaders, and a closer analysis of the soil reveals something else unusual to Corti. Tel Brak was hit from above, pummeled with debris coming straight down. She expanded her analysis to other Akkadian sites on the Habor Plains. Was the same pattern of destruction found across the region? It might help explain the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. In 1991, Corti looked 50 kilometers northeast of Tel Brak to Tel Leilan. Here, she made a startling discovery. The same flash thermal phenomenon, burn layer. And above this, something else unusual, dust. Analysis showed a thin layer of coarse debris and then a large layer of fine dust. For Corti, it indicates the surface was hit with coarse debris, the impact threw the local soil into the air to then settle as a layer of dust. Something pushed this coarse debris down onto Tel Leilan with an incredible force. But these aren't the only unexplained clues Corti found. Buried amongst the debris at each site were small pieces of plastic. Corti began to look outside the Habor Plains to see if there were any other archaeological sites that showed similar signatures. 300 kilometers from Tel Leilan is the palace ruin of Tel Amar. Here, archaeologists have uncovered something incredible.
J'ai pu constater le palais de l'Empire d'Akkad effondré intact. La structure qui a été totalement déstabilisée, qui est tombée intacte, ont resté sans voix devant cet enregistrement.
Decades of analysis indicate to Corti that the destruction was caused by a shockwave. The evidence points to a great explosive force that devastated sites across northern Mesopotamia. But Corti has no idea what it is. Corti and a team of physicists analyzed the destruction pattern. Because the debris impacted the sites from above, they looked to the sky for natural phenomena. But what could deliver such a rapid blast of high-intensity heat?
Nous avions affaire à des phénomènes plasma. Donc les phénomènes de foudre déclenchent des plasmas électriques qui transforment en fait les aérosols en nanoparticules. Et pourquoi ces nanoparticules sont si importantes? Et c'est ces mêmes oxydes de titane en nanofeuillets que j'avais identifiés dans la matrice polymère des plastiques de tellélane.
Her analysis has shown that the plastic she uncovered wasn't pollution after all, but a naturally occurring plastic polymer created by lightning. Corti has a hunch that lightning was responsible for the destruction of the Akkadian sites across the Habor Plains. But how could such a large lightning storm actually form? After decades of analysis, Corti has developed a theory that she believes explains it: a dust bomb. It requires a massive injection of dust high into the atmosphere, likely from a volcanic eruption. As this large amount of dust moves between the troposphere and the stratosphere, it creates friction, and the air becomes charged with static electricity. The electric field becomes so great that it rips atoms apart and creates plasma channels. When these channels connect, they allow the electricity to flow, and lightning is formed. As this huge amount of dust falls to Earth, it generates an incredibly powerful but localized lightning storm. When it touches down, the energy release is massive.
L'énergie est concentrée dans ce canal de foudre et avec une concentration extrêmement importante. C'est l'armare qui a été totalement déstabilisé, qui est tombé intact. Et en fait, ça se fait en quelques microsecondes. Donc ça a dû être quelque chose de remarquable.
The heightened dust needed for the phenomenon to occur could explain the thick dust layer found at Tel Leilan. Corti's analysis shows it was deposited over only a number of days. It would also explain the soot layer found across the region, intense heat caused by lightning. But it's proved impossible for Corti to date the destruction layers across each site, for certain, to the Akkadian period. And without a date range connecting the sites, there's no way of linking Corti's theory to the collapse of the Akkadian Empire. Dr. Frank Sirocco is an ocean floor sediment specialist. He is approached by archaeologists investigating the sudden end of the Akkadian Empire.
Ja, der Meeresboden ist in weiten Bereichen wirklich perfekt, um den Staub aufzuzeichnen, weil nichts anderes dort zur Ablagerung kommt.
Sirocco suggested they look at samples taken from the Gulf of Oman. If there was a dust event in Mesopotamia, it would show up here. Crucially, they might be able to date it to the Akkadian period. Dr. Sirocco analyzed the sample looking specifically for dolomite, the mineral signature for dust found in Mesopotamia.
Meistens lagen die Konzentrationen vom Dolomit so etwa bei vielleicht 5%. Und dann haben wir in diesem Kern aus dem Golf von Oman plötzlich Gehalte gefunden, die gingen hoch auf 10–20% in der Größenordnung. Und da ist uns eigentlich zum ersten Mal klar geworden, dass es so einen sehr starken Staubsturm gegeben haben muss, 2200 vor Christus, nach unseren damaligen Datierungen. Und das war eigentlich das stärkste Signal, was wir im Staub überhaupt gefunden haben in den letzten 10.000 Jahren.
Incredibly, the increase in dust lasted for 300 years. Corti believes her dust bomb event occurred in the space of a few days. But Sirocco's dusty period is much longer. What could cause such a lengthy spike in the sediment core history?
Eigentlich kann nur ein solches Ereignis über längere Zeit wirklich dieses Signal in den marinen Sedimenten verursachen. ist es eigentlich schon sehr eindeutig, dass das eine Dürre gewesen sein muss.
A 300-year-long drought could certainly account for the collapse of the Akkadian Empire.
As soon as drought takes away that agricultural base, as soon as you have too many hungry mouths to feed, your empire crumbles.
And it seems they weren't the only civilization to experience upheaval at this point in history. From the Egyptian Old Kingdom, across the region to the Indus Valley civilization in modern-day Pakistan, civilizations collapsed and entire cities were abandoned. A severe region-wide drought was beginning to make sense. But there's an issue with Dr. Sirocco's Oman results. These ocean core samples can't be analyzed at a high enough resolution for dating to be done exactly. There's an inbuilt error range of 300 years. The drought could miss the rise and fall of the Akkadian Empire entirely. In 2018, Oxford University's Paleoclimate Research Laboratory collected samples of stalagmites from caves just outside Tehran in Iran. The lab studies geology around the world and what it can tell us about ancient climate.
There's a spike in dust around 2,200 years BC. That lasts for about 300 years. Where is that dust coming from? Well, if you look at the paleoenvironmental analysis, the main area that dust is traveling from is from Mesopotamia.
And because the tests were done at a high resolution, it's possible to date the dusty period accurately. It matches the Oman samples perfectly.
What this is showing is likely drought in that region.
But what caused this drought in the first place? A phenomenon being studied as a strong cause for drought across the world is El Niño. Could it be responsible for a drought occurring at 2200 BCE? El Niño occurs when tropical water in the eastern Pacific Ocean becomes unusually warm. The effects of El Niño are unpredictable, but often cause drought around the globe. Dr. Frank Sirocco has a hunch El Niño is responsible for the drought at 2200 BCE.
Man weiß sehr genau heute, dass ein El Niño-Ereignis dazu führt, dass wir vor Peru sehr warmes Wasser haben, wo sonst die Oberflächentemperatur sehr, sehr kühl ist. Und dieses warme Wasser hinterlässt Spuren in dem Plankton, was vor Peru dann sich auf den Meeresboden absetzt.
Archaeologists look again to the soil layers at Tel Leilan. If there was drought, then surely there would be evidence. Here, they make a startling discovery.
Usually what you find in the soil at archaeological sites are the patterns of marks of activity of earthworms. What we find at Tel Leilan is that the soil is dead. There's no evidence of earthworm activity. The soil at Tel Leilan has become dust.
Unlike further south, where the land was watered by irrigation, the harbour plains were watered by rainfall. If the rain stopped, then it would cause the soil to die. Drought would make sense why there was such a large dust layer.
When the archaeologists radiocarbon dated the abandonment layer of the settlement, they got the date back 2200 BC. People only start coming back to the site around 1900 BC. So there's a 300-year gap where people don't live there.
The hiatus dates seem to fit perfectly with the Oman and Iran samples. The evidence points towards a 300-year drought, striking the Akkadian Empire right at the point they collapsed. With the Akkadian Empire severely weakened, it soon broke up into city-states, like Mesopotamia had been just 140 years before. The world's first empire, the Akkadian Empire, was gone.